What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves, physically, emotionally, and spiritually?
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago, we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique.
Help other people to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores Cannon has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT. Now you can learn her method by going directly to themoreshow.com/QHHT. And don't forget to mention the discount coupon MORETALKS. Donald Jeffries, just thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Now, Donald, you've written some fantastic books, including Hidden History, On Borrowed Fame, Survival of the Richest, and your latest book, From Strawberry Fields to Abbey Road. Now, would you say this latest book is quite a different book compared to any other book that you've written before?
Yeah, On Borrowed Fame it's kind of in the same vein as that. I usually write about political corruption, but I mean, I wrote a book about bullying. I wrote a book about economics, survival of the richest, and On Borrowed Fame is about, you know, corruption and mystery in the entertainment world. So this is kind of along those lines, because obviously maybe the most intriguing legend coming out of the entertainment world.
What's the driving force to do this book?
Well, this is the first book I've co-written. My co-author, Bob Wilson, this was his baby. This was his idea. I mean, I'm a huge Beatles fan as well. I know much more about the Beatles than the people probably, but Bob had a show, a Beatles podcast for a long time called Tomorrow Never Knows. He had a lot of the people we interviewed on the show, a member of Wings. He had, people that genuine Beatle experts like Jude Kessler, who wrote the introduction. She's probably the foremost John Lennon expert. We ended up getting the guy who cut the Beatles' hair, Leslie Cavendish. He was the Beatles' barber, and most famous hair in the world. And Bob had him on a show, so he knew people like that. People, Vera Ramon, who's in the book, is one of the widows of one of the Ramones band members. So it's fun. And then I have my own contacts as well that we interviewed. And so we just thought it would be a fun thing to ask a bunch of people from the industry and actors and so forth what they thought about the Paul is Dead legend, and any of them thought there was anything to it, and what the impact of the Beatles had on their own lives.
Now, if you were to give a bit of background on yourself, I mean, just a very short bio as well for the audience.
Well, I'm one of these guys that I really probably should be. I could be a radio talk show host if any station would pick me up, because I tend to be too controversial, though, probably for that. But my head is full of that kind of knowledge. I mean, I know lots about TV and movies and music industry and sports and all that kind of stuff, as well as politics. So I've always been kind of a junkie. I always wanted Trivial Pursuit. I always won trivia contests in bars, because I just my head was full of this kind of stuff. So I knew a lot about the Beatles, and still listen to their music. So this was kind of a natural for me. I was on board when Bob suggested the idea. I remember the Paul is Dead legend, as a little kid, and being intrigued by it, and the fact that we're still talking about it and can write a book about it over 50 years later tells you, how many people were interested in it.
Okay, so this is the idea that Paul McCartney died in a car crash in November of 1966, and ever since then, someone else has taken his identity. It was all agreed upon, in a sense, and the Paul McCartney that's out there now isn't the original Paul McCartney.
Right. That's why the subtitle is A Billy Shear Story, because that's typically the name they give to him. They also call him Fall or Fake Paul. So Billy Shears would be, his real name is apparently William Campbell, but they call him Billy Shears, but they also call him Fall. So it's kind of convoluted. But neither Bob or I think that Paul is really dead, but we're fascinated by legend and the fact that I think the Beatles, and again, I have to be careful about this because the Beatles can be litigious, but I think that the Beatles, I believe, had to have known and put these clues in there on purpose because the clues are just, they're too obvious in some cases. And so I think that this was probably a publicity gimmick. And people forget at the time that the Paul is dead legend came basically out about 3 years after he supposedly died, 1969. And at that moment, although we look at it now, it's kind of a good critical period for the Beatles. The White Album had come out in '68. That's considered a masterpiece by most people. But at the time, they weren't having the number of hits that they had before. Their impact wasn't the same as it was during Beatlemania, because most people, it took a while for them to realize, okay, they're sophisticated music, maybe it's better. And so if they had wanted to try to reinvigorate interest in the Beatles, it certainly worked. Got to the schoolyards for people like me, and we all heard about it suddenly, and then we rushed out to if we didn't own Sergeant Pepper, especially, which I didn't, we rushed out to buy it to look for the clues and look at that cover. Wow, what is going on, man? That does look like a funeral wreath at the bottom in the shape of a bass guitar. It does have 3 strings instead of 4. There's that kind of stuff. So you started noticing these things, and why is the hand over Paul's head? Is that the Welsh symbol of death? Like we would know what the Welsh symbol of death is. But so you started seeing those kind of things. Why does Paul have OPD? Why is he wearing a jacket with OPD armed jacket? Does that mean officially pronounced dead? We don't know. Or is it the Ontario Police Department? So these clues were everywhere. Why is Paul having a black rose and the others have red roses? Why does he have his back turned on the back of Sergeant Pepper? So once you started looking for him, you saw him everywhere. We played the records backwards, and was John saying, I buried Paul, or cranberry sauce, as he said, in Strawberry Fields? Who knows? But the clues were intriguing. That's what still intrigues us, because we think the Paul is dead legend isn't real, but we think the clues are very real.
Okay. Now, you've got the book as well. The book has been released in May. That's available on Amazon and all good bookstores?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's available where you buy any other book.
Right. Personally, I mean, obviously, I don't believe that Paul died in a car crash, but that's just my take on it. And we're going to get into the research that you've done, the clues that you found. I thought this would be a fun interview to do because I want to get you on for some of your other work as well, but this is your sort of latest book. So let's go to where this urban legend started then. So the fall of 1969 on a radio station, WKNR in Michigan. Is that when it was first broadcast that potentially this has happened?
Well, this is where people trace the legend to, and a student at the University of Michigan, Fred Laborde, who we also interviewed for the book, and that was a nice coup because he doesn't usually do interviews. So he's generally given credit for starting the legend, but I have a little issue with that because he talks about listening to the radio while he's thinking of an article to write. Actually, he was supposed to write a review for Abbey Road for a student newspaper. So while he's thinking of this, he hears a caller, we don't know who the caller was, calling to a radio station talking about the Paul is dead thing. So it was out there before that, obviously, if whoever this caller was good. So, and I go in the introduction a little bit about how there were snippets out there about this before that. Fred Laborde took it and ran with it. He's the one, I think, who developed things like the walrus, being a symbol of death, and the hand over the head being the Welsh symbol of death, things like that there's no evidence for. I think he's the one that noticed the OPD and said, it's their version. It's like England's version of DOA, officially pronounced dead. Things like that. Noticing the license tag on the Volkswagen in the background of the Abbey Road thing, and trying to make something out of it. How old Paul would be if he. I think that's very convoluted, but so I think that's where it started, and boy, it just caught fire and spread like wildfire across college campuses, and eventually that kind of stuff filters down to where elementary school students like me heard of it.
Now, back in 1969, a local radio DJ broke the story. Was that Rusty Gibbs or Fred Laborde?
No, I think it was Fred Laborde.
Right, it was Fred Laborde. Okay.
Fred Laborde, yeah. That's who's generally given credit for it. And he was the one who wrote the first article on it during he was doing a review on Abbey Road. He's the one that wrote the article for it to the University of Michigan. But he talks about hearing someone on the radio. So who was that? We don't know who that guy was. I don't know. How did he know about it?
And there's no recordings. I mean, obviously, only the big stations would have kept archives at the time.
Yeah, no.
Okay. So who was Paul replaced with then?
Well, that's the I can again, someone I've obviously open. People read a lot of my writing. I'm open to conspiracies and corruption. I can believe almost anything. And if someone could tell me, I would buy if they said, hey, they had secret cloning technology, and so they actually cloned Paul. I would say, oh, well, that's feasible. Okay, that's possible, I guess. But the fact that they claimed this guy, William Campbell, Billy Shears, he won a Paul McCartney lookalike contest. And for whatever reason, the Beatles reacted differently than any other musical act has, because lots of big rock stars had died. I mean, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones died. Replace him or make up a story. When Buddy Holly died, they didn't come up with a replacement for him. So huge stars had died before. This is the only kind of its theory that came out there that that they thought somehow they couldn't go on, and it also. A big piece of the evidence for the people that believe Paul is dead is the fact that Beatles stopped touring right about the time Paul would have died. And they can't go on stage without Paul. So that's one of their main items of evidence, they say. But as I say, you just go past the odds of find someone that looks that much like him. It's pretty amazing. He's left-handed. Although the theory claims that actually William Campbell was right-handed and learned to play left-handed, which makes it even more amazing. Really, and could sing pretty much the exact same way, and not only could write all these, timeless songs, but I've said many times, if you subscribe to this theory, the Beatles started out being very John Lennon-centric. I mean, I still love the early Beatles because I love Lennon. The early Beatles are dominated by Lennon's voice and his songwriting. All the early hits were mostly Lennon's. He was the unquestioned leader of the Beatles. However, after 1966, that's when Paul begins to creep in and take over. He becomes more prolific. So by the time you have Sgt. Pepper's, basically an almost mostly Paul album. Abbey Road is a mostly Paul album, as is Let It Be. So those are the works that for which the McCartneys mostly remember. So I said, so if this guy was a replacement, he's arguably much more talented than the original Paul. Because and not only that, but he got John Lennon, who's a very proud alpha male. He got Lennon to back up and let the replacement take over. I'll take a back seat. So people, really is that when they talk about this, the dominant Paul period would have been the Billy Shears period. So I think that's probably the most ridiculous aspect of it. That not to mention the fact that if this guy was this talented, why was he entering a lookalike contest? Why wasn't he already fronting a band? Why wasn't he already known in the music community? And apparently he wasn't.
And this is William Campbell, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll get back to William in just a second. How many people did you roughly interview for the book?
God, I didn't count the interviews. It must be, I guess it's probably close to, I didn't really count them, but, we had a lot of, they're pretty brief interviews, but we asked them basically the same questions. And don't hold me to that figure. I don't think I counted them, but I have a lot of these contacts that I made mostly when I was researching on Borrowed Fame, because I wanted to talk about, how was your experience like on a television show or in a band. So people like Susan Olsen, who played Cindy on the Brady Bunch, her and I become really good friends. So she was a natural. Sally Kirkland is another one I've got to know well. She was an Oscar-nominated actress. She was in JFK, and my JFK assassination interest. I got through that. One of the Love and Spoonful members is in there. Again, Bob knows so many of these people, somebody from Lawrence Huber of Wings who played with McCartney. So a lot of these people, like Sally Kirkland, knew Beatles. She's a friend with Ringo Starr. She officiated at his bodyguard's wedding. So these are people that a lot of them knew the Beatles, kind of insiders. I didn't really expect any of them to say, okay, you caught us. Yes, of course he really died, but it's interesting reading their revelations, because a lot of it is or at the very least they saw them when like John Probus, who played Timmy and Lassie. He talks in the book about going and seeing the Beatles, live. when he was a teenager. So I think they're interesting anecdotal accounts, about what people in the industry thought of this rumor.
And what was the feedback from the contributors of the book? What was their take on it then?
Well, I don't want to provide too many spoilers, but I think people would charge that there's widespread speculation about it. I think you would say, skepticism about it. You would say that I don't think, like I said, we didn't have anybody say, yeah, of course he's dead. I did have somebody in there that I wanted to have the other side presented a little bit, and the problem is a lot of those people they're not easy to deal with because they're just very extreme and they're so sure that this is right. But I found one who's pretty reasonable, and so we let him have kind of a lengthy explanation of what the evidence is and why people believe it. And, they go way down the rabbit hole, and it is what it is. People can judge for themselves.
Well, thank you. Now, with William Campbell, obviously he's still alive right now, I would have thought. Is he not?
I think so. So. Yeah.
So who is Paul McCartney now then?
Well, that's where it gets kind of, because I remember seeing a video, and I guess it would have been the William Campbell guy or somebody that they tried to catch outside his house or something. And I didn't even understand it because, if he's Paul McCartney, then who is this guy? And that's what happens with some conspiracy theories like that. There are inconsistencies, because you would have to say that obviously there is no, Billy Campbell is Paul McCartney. What the Beatles have been very circumspect about talking about it. I have quotes in the book we have quotes in the book both from Lennon and George Harrison. We're very angry quotes about, how stupid can you believe it? This is so dumb. But then you have Lennon on the White Album, talking about, here's another clue for you all, the walrus was Paul. He's still playing around with it at that point. And when Paul has been asked about it, most of the time he's been very dismissive, but a couple of times, I think it was with David Letterman, he for instance, when he was talking, and his explanations to me didn't make any sense, which again can only lead me to suspect that they were all playing along and this was a publicity gimmick. Yeah, I don't know, but that's what I suspect, because on one of the videos, I think it was for Your Mother Should Know from the Magical Mystery Tour album, they did a kind of a highfalutin musical video number where you can tell John Lennon was uncomfortable because he hated that kind of stuff. He called it granny music, Paul's granny music, but he's doing it. And all of them are wearing red roses, but Paul is wearing a black rose. Eddie's wearing a black rose. Why would he be doing that? So they asked him about it, and his explanation said, well, we ran out of red roses. And that made no sense, because during the video, they're all running around throwing red roses in the air. They're having a wheelbarrow. So that doesn't make any sense. And even more ludicrous is his when he was talking about the Abbey Road cover. And have you seen the iconic cover photo where the four Beatles are walking across Abbey Road? John Lennon is supposedly dressed as the preacher. George Harrison is supposedly dressed as the grave digger. Ringo is supposed to represent the mourner. And of course, Paul is the corpse because he's not wearing any shoes. He's the only one that's barefoot. But people asked him about that. Or I think it was Letterman asked him about it. And he said, well, it was such a hot day that I had to kick off my sandals. So you kicked off your sandals on a hot day and walked across really hot pavement barefoot? So you see, those are the kind of things. So I think they're playing along with it, because that explanation makes no sense. But and that's the kind of thing that makes people continue to get dragged into this legend. Why would he say that? And of course, I have the very kind of cryptic quotes from Paul's wife, Heather. I think it was the one that had the one leg. He gave all the money
McCartney.
to. No, not Linda. His
sorry.
The second
Yes,
one.
I'm so sorry.
Heather Mills.
Heather Mills. Yeah.
Heather Mills, who was took him for like $200 million, whatever. But she left some very strange quotes behind it. I have them. I don't remember them exactly off the top of my head, but they're in the book, where she basically said, she's keeping some deep, dark secret about him or something. But the way she said it could easily be interpreted that knows that he's not really Paul McCartney. And that's what the true believers believe. But people can judge themselves. I don't know what she was talking about, but it leaves that door open.
Now, I read this somewhere when doing my research, and just tell the audience as well, on the Sgt. Pepper album, when you hold a mirror up to it, what happens?
Yeah. Well, I see. That's why I said I think this had to be planned, because this is very convoluted and took some effort to do. So I've never done it, but supposedly it's not one of the main clues that I heard about as a kid. But supposedly, if you hold the album cover up to a mirror at a certain angle, I think on the drum set it says something like "I we die" or something like. And it's not. Most of these clues are not exact. I mean, they're, it's like Nostradamus saying Hitler instead of Hitler. Why didn't he just say Hitler? But so it doesn't say like Paul is dead. It's like I we die or something, and people, oh, he must be talking about Paul. And that's what most of these clues are. Almost none of them are blatant. None of them are going to say, yeah, Paul died in a car accident November 9th, 1966. It's all kind of hints at something, and people are running with it.
Now, there's a number of clues you point to, and I've never heard this because I've never played a record backwards, but when you play Strawberry Fields backwards, you hear John Lennon saying, "I buried Paul."
Right. Well, that's Lennon addressed that and said it's cranberry. I said it says cranberry sauce, and if you, I mean, it's very close listening to it. But again, those people that do the backwards masking, I'm not a I don't kind of have a huge understanding of it, but I think if you listen to that, you can interpret it. You could hear him say, "I buried Paul," but you could just as easily hear him say cranberries. Not very clear.
Right. So back in the late 60s then, this urban legend really took a hold, and this is obviously
yes.
pre-internet, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this was just newspapers and articles.
Yeah, and that's what made it. I mean, God knows what it would be in the age of the internet, but I think that's why it still has a life. Well, you still have people online, and you have websites that analyze the pictures. The original Paul had I forget what, one of them had a mole on his chest on one side, and the other one doesn't, or something. And they've analyzed photos of the pre-1966 Paul and the post-1966 Paul, and one of them has a mole, one of them doesn't. They've analyzed the ears, how long the ears are, how round the face is. Height is a particular, and I tell you, there is something strange about the height of the Beatles, because for some reason, I've watched so much video of the Beatles, and I just love watching them. I'm fascinated by their personalities and their music, but something I just notice height sometime. And if you look at the four Beatles, it's obvious Ringo is the shortest, and it's obvious that George is the second shortest. But between Paul and John, it's a lot of in some pictures Paul looks taller, and other pictures John looks taller. Most of the time they look about the same. And one of the theories in this is that the original Paul, I think, was shorter than the Billy Tears or something. They claim in the post, and I really haven't noticed that there's a time factor. To me, they always just kind of look inconsistent in height, but that's something maybe somebody else noticed and ran with it and said, see, he got taller, but who knows? But when you're looking for things, you're going to find things maybe you wouldn't otherwise.
And you mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation that Paul was wearing a badge of some sort. I think you mentioned OPP
yes.
badge.
OPD. It
was OPD, right? I wasn't too sure.
Well, OPD, which is supposedly is for Ontario Police Department, but I don't understand that either, because the album had nothing to do with Canada. So why would he have an Ontario Police Department? And he has no connection to Canada, either the Beatles, but Fred Labor, whoever came up with it, said no, it means officially pronounced dead. It's like the British or the Canadian version or something of DOA, which again, one of those things. It could be feasible to somebody. How are you going to check up on that? Okay, that sounds. I don't know. What is the Welsh? One of the Welsh symbol of death is the hand over the head. Who would know that?
Well, when I skimmed through the book as well today, I saw that there was a foreword by a lady called Jude, and I believe she's written extensively about John Lennon.
Yes.
What was important about her input into this book, do you think?
Yeah, well, Jude's a friend. We've been on her show. I've been on her show. She's been on mine. She's probably the world's biggest expert on John Lennon. I think she's up to, God, I don't know, six or seven volumes. They're all about 1,000 pages each, and I think she's going to make a 9-volume set. So nobody's covered the life of John Lennon like she has. But so she's a good, even better friend with Bob. Bob's known her longer, so we thought she would be good to write the foreword. And she has a kind of a unique insight because she's much more of a Lennon fan than a McCartney fan. So she kind of looks at it really dispassionately. Some people that love Paul may want to believe one or the other or something, but she's like me. She's more of a Lennon fan, so she has a real insider perspective, and she's been following. And we talked to people like that. I think we have one of the people that that answered the question of the book is Ivor Davis, who's he's getting up in years now, but he's a longtime veteran British journalist. This guy was very friendly with the Beatles. Is still friends with Paul and Ringo. He knew he toured with the Beatles on their original 1964 tour of America, so he stayed in the same hotels with them. Probably, I think, probably shared the groupies. I've kind of had to ask him. I don't. So I mean, this guy. Nobody experienced Beatlemania like this guy did. So he's a fascinating character, and he also speaks from somebody who knows. And so people that know Paul, obviously, it would be logical to assume that if you knew him on the original 1964 tour and you'd still know him, and you kind of knew him all along, that you might have noticed a change, or so you would have noticed, I would think, I don't know. Again, that's where it comes into, they have secret cloning technology. I might be able to buy that, but the perfect replacement, that would have to be perfect.
Well, wouldn't you have noticed that even acoustically, John would have been different if it wasn't the original John?
Well, you would. There's not many. I mean, again, I'm a big Lennon fan, but nobody can deny McCartney's was probably one of the most prolific songwriters ever. This guy just has written so many songs. So you would have to find somebody that looked like him, played, and apparently became a left-handed guitar player. That's pretty. It's not easy to do. Just to be, and to the extent that you can, because McCartney's a really excellent musician, piano player and everything. And to be able to, because you would have to credit Billy Shears with writing, Long and Winding Road, Hey Jude. And a lot of the songs McCartney is most remembered for. So is that possible? I don't know, where the real McCartney would be remembered for All My Loving, and I Saw Her Standing There, and things like that. It's obviously very unlikely, and I would think you'd notice at least some kind of difference in the singing voice. The singing voice pretty much seems the same all along to me. And the fact that there was, put it conservatively, there was no diminishment in quality. So they split somebody in, and he kept writing the same kind of songs. Again, you could argue that he began writing much superior songs. Is that possible, that they had a replacement out there who wasn't even in a band, who all he could do was enter a lookalike contest, and this guy had those kinds of songs in him? I don't know. I think it's pretty unlikely.
Well, it's not the first time I've heard that, someone may not have died. I mean, you look at, just even JFK Jr., there's people in the Q movement that think that he's come back, and he never left. Some people, I guess, feel the same about Elvis. Yes. But there's something about rock stars, isn't there? And the idea that they've continued in a way.
Well, but what's different, what distinguishes the McCartney legend is that, those other ones, and really one of the first big ones happened right after the Paul is dead rumor, and that would be Jim Morrison. Lots of people think Jim Morrison, he couldn't have died in a bathtub at age 27 of a heart attack. He obviously faked his death. And then you had Elvis was a big one. Elvis didn't die. You have going down to Tupac Shakur, people like that people believe that into the 90s. But what McCartney is the only one who people don't think he faked his death. People think he died, and they pretend that he didn't. They replaced him. So that's what makes it unique. None of those other legends, they're all the same, where they think, well, no, Elvis, it's probably wishful thinking. Elvis couldn't have died. He faked his own death. Tupac Shakur or whatever. In this case, no, McCartney really died. The Beatles, they engineered this conspiracy to claim that he was still alive, and they hired a replacement. So it's really unique, I think, in the history of entertainment.
Well, just knowing a little bit about Paul McCartney's history myself, I mean, he grew up in Liverpool. Music was in his blood from a very early age. So, if this isn't the original Paul McCartney, then whoever's, playing the character now, they've got some pretty big shoes to fill. Well,
we have got nothing but positive response so far that we've heard. I expected because I think the book is very even-handed. It's not. It's definitely my least controversial book. I can tell you that. It's not very controversial. I don't think. More of a fun book. But I thought I might hear more from people who believe he's dead that would be complaining that we're covering up. But I really haven't heard from those people either. So if they're critiquing it, they're keeping it to themselves. They haven't put up negative reviews yet, but we'll see. I mean, it reports it's very new. It hasn't been out very long, so maybe the time will come when we'll be receiving.
I'm just thinking about it, having watched some history on Paul McCartney. Obviously, he grew up as a musician and a songwriter. So, there was a big void to fill if that was the case.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's, I think that of all the great songwriting teams that ever existed, I think Lennon and McCartney have to be at the top of the list. And although they were unique too, in that most songwriting teams of Rodgers and Hammerstein, people like that, going back to Broadway days, in most cases, one of them was a lyricist and one of them wrote the melody. The Beatles were never that way. The Beatles typically they either had their individual songs, and they put both their names on all their songs. They made an agreement when they were teenagers to do that, because they both are writing so many songs. So this was a Paul song, but we'll call it Lennon McCartney. This was a John song, we'll call it Lennon McCartney. But they did collaborate on, as Lennon described it, sitting there with guitars across from each other on adjacent beds, writing eyeball to eyeball, is the way he described it. So there were songs like that in many of the early songs, but you can usually tell typically by who's singing the lead. So typically John sang his songs and Paul sang his song. That was typically the way they did it. But it was a unique arrangement. And then as they grew older, as the Beatles got more sophisticated, the separation became more complete. Or it's pretty much, that's a Paul song, that's a John song. In the end, it's who sang it. And so they were unlike really any other songwriting duo in the history of the world in that case. And the prolific nature of it, they put out so much. Because not only did they do that, they wrote so many songs for other Beatle and British invasion groups, especially. They wrote a lot of big hits for the other Mercy Beat groups, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, and places like groups like that had number one hits. Peter and Gordon had a couple things that these were Beatles songs, Lennon and McCartney songs, and they just said, "What you guys have it." So they were, and consider how young they were. It's amazing. And if Lennon had not had a drug problem later, there's no telling how many songs he would have written, because he was just as prolific as McCartney early on, but then he kind of petered out when he had his own issues. And so there's no telling what very much like Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, had those kinds of issues as well that really impacted his, the nature of, in terms of the prolific nature of his material. Still had a lot of quality. But McCartney wasn't as impacted by drugs, and he just kept cranking them out. And so when you see an album like Sgt. Pepper, if you take out, especially A Day in the Life, which is probably the heart of the album, and I think one of the greatest songs Lennon wrote, but even that has a middle eight where McCartney's voice comes in. That's him. He wrote that to kind of pick it up. The rest of it is Lennon. But other than that, McCartney's, the same thing with Abbey Road when he wrote, the End Suite and all that stuff. That's all him. And so I don't think any kind of input from Lennon. And if you believe this legend, it's all Billy Shears. So was he capable of doing that? I don't know.
And I believe that when this urban legend first came out, back in the day, back in 1969 or around that period, as soon as the Beatles heard of this rumor, they squashed it straight away, right?
Yeah, they did, but they kind of, for the most part, Paul just kind of, I think he said something like, "I think I'd be the first to know if I was dead," or something like that, And Lennon and Harrison kind of angrily rebuffed it. Ringo never really had much to say. And then, of course, later I talk in the book about how, in fact, I had one of the guys, Joel Gilbert, the filmmaker, who made a mockumentary, very convincing. And he talked about like the last testament of George Harrison, and supposedly they recorded a voice right before he died that, I guess it sounded like a dying George Harrison. I don't know. And talking about how this was all true and they all conspired to cover it up. And he wanted to, on his deathbed, he wanted to tell the truth. And the guy I had on my show, and he told me, Joel Gilbert, that it's a mockumentary. I just wanted to have fun with it. He did a very convincing job. And Ringo gave another fake interview too. That one of the people we interview in the book as well talked about how Bruce Spicer, who wrote a big article about this, with all these quotes from Ringo about, yeah, we had to cover it up. But it was all fake. So, people keep playing around with it and feeding into it because there are websites out there that, like the guy I included in the book, Sage of Quay, they call them. There are people out there that really run with this, and they'll get into heated arguments with you. Because I have so many controversial things on my show. I mean, I'm very open-minded. So bring it on, as crazy as you want to be. And the crazier the better. Sometimes I like listening to it, but that's one that I haven't had on really until I wrote this book, because I can see the people in my chat room would start telling me about all these people. Why aren't you talking about Paul is dead? And a lot of the people out there believe it. Of course Paul is dead. It's Billy Shears, and so I don't know what the percentage would be of the people that believe it. But in the alternative news world where I am, probably a significant chunk of the people out there that do believe the legend.
But why did they do it for? I mean, why would you do that? Why cover that up?
Exactly. Well, that's again. I believe that there are crimes and cover-ups going on all the time. I have no trust in our leaders. But this one, I said, what's the motivation here? I don't understand it. Okay, he died, and lots of other rock stars died in car crashes and plane crashes. No one ever put out a fake Buddy Holly or any of these other people. So why would they do it here? But again, they're just sold on those clues, all those clues they saw, and they figure, well, they wouldn't have put all those clues out there if it didn't happen. They were trying to tell. Well, why didn't they just tell the people? Why do you have to go to this length to do it? But I can't get inside their heads why they want to. Again, some people just want to. There are people out there that don't believe anything. Again, I've been researching the JFK assassination for a long time, and there are still people that don't believe he was assassinated. Not many, but there are some that believe the whole thing was fake. So, I don't go that far. So I won't entertain that on the show. It's fine. You want to believe it, but there are people that believe nothing really happened, that the Manson murders didn't happen, and they believe everything is fake. And so you can't, there's nothing. I said, I'm really open-minded, and I believe there's a lot of corruption everywhere and a lot of lies, but there are people. So I think those are probably those people that believe everything's fake.
Yeah, and then you got to think to yourself as well, how would you keep that covered up? Just imagine all the people involved. We've got Apple, for starters, right? We've got the management, we've got the family, we've got recording engineers, we've got everything that goes with an artist of that size, right? How would that be kept covered up?
Yeah, well, I think you could get something covered up if there was a logical reason that I could see for it. I don't see any motivation for anybody beyond mate. Okay, you could maybe argue that the other Beatles, for whatever reason, I don't even think they would do it. But if they came up with this idea, yeah, I don't think the entire industry would climb on board with it. And I think, because first of all, I don't think the industry would believe, because if they say, well, hey, we can replace Paul, we got this guy that's lookalike here who's just good, even better than him. Okay, well, why wasn't he in the band to begin with then? I think that it would be met with that kind of skepticism. And the fact that from 66 to 69, no one questioned it. The music that was coming out, nobody said, hey, that doesn't sound like McCartney. That must be somebody else. It wasn't until this was pointed out. And people also didn't notice the clues right away either. It wasn't until this article came out, and wherever that caller came from that inspired the article, we still don't know. It wasn't until, because looking at Sgt. Pepper's album cover before I heard of this, it did kind of give me there was like a creepy aspect to it, a funereal aspect. But I didn't look much beyond that, just thinking, okay, they're just going for some kind of weird somber thing. I don't know. But because they chose a lot of strange, eclectic celebrities to have on the cover, and they wanted lots more. I think they wanted John Lennon, wanted Hitler, and some other people that they edited out. Other people wanted to be paid for it and everything. But once you start looking for these things and you start noticing, the bass guitar, that does look like kind of a funeral flower arrangement. Right? And, you're not going to notice that it has 3 strings instead of 4 unless you really look for it. But once you look for it, why would they have a 3-string bass? Because there's only 3 Beatles left now. So once you start noticing these, and you mentioned about the mirror, if you go to the lengths of holding a mirror up and looking at the drum in the background, again, that's going to quite a length there to have it just be happenstance. So I think that these things were planted there for whatever reason, but it certainly drew interest. And look, we wrote a book about it 50 plus years later, and we're still talking about it.
Well, I guess thinking about it, there are ways to test, but obviously back in the day, there was no DNA testing, was there, for example?
Well, that's one of the crucial, and that's the only bit of so-called evidence that maybe makes me think. And that is supposedly, and you're right, DNA could resolve it. But I think either McCartney doesn't want to validate to give this any legitimacy, or he's really curious. But when they were arrested, he was arrested in London, I think, or Japan. I think it was Japan. He was arrested for marijuana possession, and supposedly, I quote it all in the book. People can read it, the details in there, and I don't have it on the top of my head, but it was something like they brought in a team of forensic analysts or something to look at the handwriting, I think, or the handwriting, or maybe the fingerprints. I think it was a finger or something, which are certain. That's forensic evidence. Don't hold me for it. It's all in the book there. But whatever it was a little interesting that supposedly they all came up and said, no, this is not the same guy. I don't know what that means. But that's the only evidence that makes you kind of turn your head and say, okay, because DNA doesn't lie, fingerprints don't lie. But you're right. If McCartney wanted to shut this up forever, all he'd have to do is if this is McCartney, all he'd have to do is, because I think he has a half sister. I think his stepmother's still alive, but no, she wouldn't have the same DNA. But I think he has a stepsister, and he has his brother still alive. So that would be the best bet. You get a brother, do a DNA test, and see. If it doesn't match, then okay, wow, this guy, maybe he is Billy Shears. But if he is, then the rumors are over. But I don't know why he doesn't do that again. Maybe the most innocent explanation is that he doesn't want to lend credibility to this kind of circus act, I guess.
I had no idea that his brother was still alive. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's Mike McCartney. Yeah, he has a brother that's still alive. Yep.
And I know that you've interviewed a lot of people for the book, and we've touched on this already, but was there anyone in those interviews that you did that really made you think, oh, this could be true?
Well, again, I think the ones that stand out to me are the ones that McCartney addressed and gave inadequate explanations for. One would be the black rose versus the red roses. There's an innocent explanation for it. It isn't the fact that they ran out of red roses, because in the same video, he can be seen throwing red roses in the air out of a wheelbarrow. So they obviously had a red rose to put in there. They put a black rose in there for some reason. Okay, if they're trying to say he's dead, that would be what the people saying this. Why else would you do that? So that's something I find intriguing, because he addressed it and his explanation made no sense. Same thing with him walking across Abbey Road. Why isn't he wearing any shoes? People say this because people are buried barefoot. He's a corpse, right? That's the idea of it. Well, his explanation that he kicked his sandals off because it was such a hot day, that doesn't make sense, because it would feel worse. I mean, you walk across a hot street with your sandals on, it's not going to burn the bottom of your feet. It is going to burn the bottom of your feet if you're barefoot. So, and that's what David Letterman should have, but I guess, again, they didn't want to act like they were actually believing it. That's what I would have done. I said, well, what do you mean? Weren't your feet even hotter?
Well, when you look at Paul, I mean, for his age, he's remarkably healthy, and
yes,
and very fit, and he's touring still. I mean, hats off to him. I mean, that's remarkable, isn't it? Really, it's
incredible. Yeah, it is. We saw him. My wife and I and some other family members. We saw him. He had a concert at RFK Stadium in DC about. I want to say it's been 13, 14 years ago, and so he was in his 60s then. And we ended up seeing it for free, because for some reason, a Beatle couldn't sell out RFK Stadium. So they ended up giving out free tickets to the grocery store. My wife got like 12 free tickets. We took them back to people. And so we saw McCartney for free. It was incredible. But one of the best concerts I've ever taken. He played for like 2.5 hours, nonstop, no breaks. I think he was in his mid-60s, lots of energy, sounded great. So if that's Billy Shears, he's impressive.
I mean, I sort of mentioned this before with the amount of people that you've interviewed for the book, but was there any of those people that you interviewed that where they said something that just really stood out to you? What made you think?
Well, certainly the sage of Quay, Mike Williams, he was the only person pushing the Paul is dead theory that we interviewed in the book. I mean, again, some of his stuff, people can read it for themselves, but he's obviously educated on the subject. So he tries to make the best case possible for it. But in terms of like one Vera Ramon, who was the widow of Didi Ramon, of the Ramones, she kind of surprised me because she seemed to be, there was some doubts with her. I think she said she's on the fence. So I was surprised because, again, that's a music industry insider. And the same, but, people like, we had somebody from the Cowsills, Bob Cowsill was on. We had a member of the Love and Spoonful, member of Wings. I had Richie Furry, who was in Buffalo Springfield, and Poco, Southerhoven Fury Band. And most of the people said the same thing. I think they just, many of them at least had met McCartney. And in place of Lawrence Juber, he played with McCartney and Wings. That was his successful band as a solo act. So there were, again, I don't want to put any spoilers out, but I was actually maybe a little disappointed we didn't have more doubt, like among the people. Well, I thought, one day he came in and his ears did look different, or something like that.
Well, I mean, this would have meant, though, that the other Beatles that are no longer with us, they would have taken this to their grave then.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing I say, too, because and I wish, even if, Bob Wilson and I suspect that the Beatles did know about the clues and they're the ones that were responsible for putting them in there. But to me, it has like John Lennon all over it. Again, I can't prove it, anything, and please, I'm not saying for sure, but that's what I think looking at it. But but even if they had done that, it wasn't a criminal offense. They didn't commit any crime. So at this point, if they confess to it, I don't even know how many people would be disappointed. Bob people might think it's cool. Oh, wow, I thought that was really cool the way you planted this. I don't think they would lose any fans over that. Certainly Paul and Ringo. I don't think people would stop listening to them,
I mean, I'm doing a documentary, and it sort of touches upon the Q movement as well. And knowing what I know, I mean, there's a lot of people that would have no problem in believing this, right?
No, well, yeah, I think people in Q certainly, and I've written a lot about that. That's I think that was I personally believe Q was a psyop, probably an intelligence agency story. Because it was to put that hopium out there, to kind of 2 more weeks, the white hats are coming, trust the plan. And people still, and the JFK Jr. thing was, I was the first one to launch a hidden history. I was the first one to independently investigate that. And I believe he was assassinated. I don't think there's any question about it. I think they lied and covered that up just like the other Kennedy assassinations. But when I talked about that on some of these shows, if it had a huge Q audience, and a lot of them did, they would be incensed because they think he's alive. And I said, okay, I don't know. And again, I don't know what the motivation is. I said, and you're talking about, it's 24 years now, 1999. So at what point is he going to emerge? Well, he's going to come out of the shadows with Trump. Well, that didn't happen. But you're right. The Q crowd, at this point, they're in so deep that it's way more convoluted than the Paul thing. Very political. And they're so committed to it that at this point, I think they just can't let it go. They have to keep saying 2 more weeks.
No, the Cuban, that's right. It's very different to what we're discussing right now. This is kind of a lighthearted,
yes.
As you say, fun kind of conversation. It's it's just a what if, right? But yeah, you did actually do a lot of legacy work. That's what you're known for on the JFK assassination.
Yes, that's where I got my start. I was as a teenager in the mid '70s. I was a volunteer with Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry. Mark Lane was the most famous critic of the Warren Commission. He wrote Rush to Judgment. He used to be on a lot of TV and radio shows back in the day when they allowed that stuff on the air here and there. He was my mentor. I developed my own political philosophy. He was a civil libertarian. I'm still a civil libertarian. There's very few of us left. And I came from the left, where he came from. The left is dead to me now because they're all woke and most of them are insane and they can't stand me. One of my books, Survival of the Richest, they should have loved that, but they don't because of who I am and the other stuff I'm saying. So I'm talking about redistribution of the wealth and everything, but
well, I would love to get you back on for that because I know that's what you're known for, and I know this was was
sure.
a bit of fun for you as well. But you know, your main work was that, and I mean, it's just even the times we live in right now. I mean, to think that there's a Kennedy that's going in for the race right now.
Yes.
We live in different times, and it's almost come full circle. So it's definitely something I would like to discuss with you. So I should have asked you this before, but your website's been coming up on the screen as well. But your website is for the audience on a podcast?
Well, my website is donaldjeffries.media, but I tell people, and you can find out everything about me there, but my shadow banned on Twitter and Facebook. I'm there at Don Jeffries on Twitter. And again, people think there's not a conspiracy. I have people all the time. One guy told me the other day, I've had to follow you like 8 different times. You just keep unfollowing people. And so it's there. So Substack is the last free speech platform. Lots of people like Glenn Greenwald, my friend Naomi Wolf, that are writing there. That's where I'm growing. So I ask people to go to there. It's called I Protest, like my live streaming podcast is called I Protest. DonaldJeffries@Substack.com. I write there regularly, and that's where I do my promotion now, because if I try to promote things, even the Beatles book, which is not controversial, when I put something about Facebook on, they really limited how many people.
Okay, so your book is available from all good bookstores. Obviously, we're going to be putting links below for the Amazon link as well. Anything we've mentioned here, link-wise, will be in the description below. Is there any sort of final message you might like to give to the audience, Donald?
No, well, about this particular book, it is a fun book. I think no one's had anything bad to say about it. It's a lighthearted read, and you're probably not going to see me associated with the word lighthearted anywhere else. Most of my stuff is usually serious. It's investigative work. It's controversial subjects. It's controversial, but and the way it was Bob Wilson's idea to do the interviews. It's by far the easiest book we've ever written, because it kind of wrote itself, because you just get all these people, you ask them the questions. We didn't edit their responses. We let them speak for themselves, and the result is what it is. But I think it's it's a fun book to take to the beach or something, to read, and you should be entertained by it.
Yeah, well, we've barely scratched the surface of your book. In your book, you go deep into all the information that you've collected on all the research that you've done over the many years as well. So that book's been coming up on the screen, and obviously it's linked in the description below. Donald, I just want to thank you very much for coming on today. So just thank you so much, and I look forward to getting you on for your other books as well. So thank you.
I'd be interested anytime you want to have me, Kevin. Thanks for having me.